like lions and sharks, and omnivores, like humans that do eat meat, and bears, are secondary consumers. So let's move on to the decomposers. These are heterotrophs that derive energy and nutrients from dead organisms. They're essential in the decomposition of dead organisms, and this is important because of the nutrient cycling that we talked about. They change organic compounds back into inorganic ones. Examples of these decomposers are fungi and bacteria. So here's another slide about ecosystems. Producers, consumers, and decomposers can be thought of as part of a food chain. A food chain results in the transfer of energy and nutrients from one organism to another within an ecosystem. The feeding level that's occupied by an organism in a food chain represents its trophic level. So for instance, first trophic level, something like grass, the producers. Second trophic level, something like a rabbit, a primary consumer. And the third trophic level, something like a fox or secondary consumer. So that's how trophic levels compare to food chains. You can also do food webs because, of course, foxes don't only eat rabbits, and rabbits don't only eat grass. They eat all different kinds of things. They interact with each other in a more complicated system than this. This is a very simplistic way of looking at it, but quite fine for this course. Each time you go up a trophic level, you're going to lose energy. We mentioned that briefly. Okay, so when you're talking about ecosystems, it's important to think about the essential elements and the energy flow. Nutrient cycling is a critical function of these ecosystems. There are 17 essential elements. Only 6 elements, however, form about 95% of plant matter: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. Other essential elements, things that biotic components need, are these potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, zinc, and copper. These guys. Okay, so these are essential elements which are inorganic, but we need them. Energy flows through the system in a series of transformations. Light energy from the sun is changed to chemical energy and stored in plant tissue, those producers making energy from the sun, turning it into plant tissue. Part of the energy that's stored in the plants is transferred to the animals that eat those plants. Another transfer of energy occurs from the primary to secondary consumers. However, each time you go from a lower trophic level to a higher trophic level, you lose energy, because part of that energy is converted into waste heat. Only about 10 to 20% of energy is transferred upward. That's not very efficient. Only 10 to 20% of the energy that was in those plants is transferred up into those primary consumers, those little bunnies. Ecological pyramids. I've seen this come up before too as a diagram. Due to the losses of energy from a trophic level to a higher one, the biomass, or which you could say is the dry weight of all organisms of a certain trophic level, decreases with an increase in the trophic level. So for instance, you start out at the bottom with all sorts of producers, but then you move on to the primary consumers, you can only have a few. And then as you get up to the secondary consumers, very few. Because you're losing energy each time. You have to have way more producers at the bottom to support even a few of the secondary consumers at the top. So an ecological pyramid is established because of the loss of energy available for use by each subsequent trophic level. An ecosystem is in balance when the structure of the ecological pyramid is satisfied. How would you satisfy the structure? Well, that means that the type of organisms and the relative abundance, or the number of them present, are in certain proportions. So if you had a whole ton of foxes and a few bunnies and hardly any plants, you'd be in trouble, because there wouldn't be enough food for the foxes and there wouldn't be enough food for the little bunnies, or in this case they look like sheep or something. There's a big version of the ecological pyramid. Yeah, they do appear to be sheep. So the fox is going to eat the sheep and they're going to eat the plants. If there's not enough of any one of these levels, the guys in the top are in big trouble fast. So there's the diagram that we've seen before of the ecosphere. So it includes the biosphere. It includes that biosphere. And it also includes the region where the living organisms interact with the other components of the Earth system, like your pond ecosystem we talked about. the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the solid earth, or lithosphere. The ecosphere is the ecosystem for the entire planet. Okay, so you can think of it as one huge ecosystem, the ecosystem of the planet Earth. The ecosphere, what is it and why is it important? Well, it's a thin film around the planet where the biota interacts with the atmosphere, lithosphere, and hydrosphere in a complex system involving biological, geological, and chemical cycles, hence the term biogeochemical. A biogeochemical system is powered by energy from the sun, with a small contribution to that energy from processes within the earth itself. So what are we circulating? We're circulating matter and we're circulating energy around the whole earth. So the biota actually is responsible for keeping carbon in both organic and inorganic compounds, and it works with the lithosphere, the atmosphere, and the hydrosphere to maintain the balance of carbon and other biologically reactive elements. So the biota is an important part of where carbon is found on the planet Earth. This is going to become important when we talk about climate warming. So this complex system, that being the ecosphere, is unique. It supports the only known life in the universe, which is our biota. So when we think about the ecosphere, we have to talk about physical factors. Physical factors influence the types of life that can actually live in a particular environment. Most life is restricted to a zone which is found between 200 meters below the surface of the oceans and 6,000 meters above sea level. So you can see it right there. Most life is in that zone, from 6,000 meters above sea level to 200 meters below the sea level. Most of life on Earth. Biomes. Biomes are definitely something you need to read up on. They represent groups of ecosystems that are exposed to similar climatic conditions, so things like temperature and moisture in your climate, having dominant organisms with a similar life cycle, climatic adaptations, and physical structure. So what does that mean? That means that the guys that live there tend to have similar cycles of life. They tend to be adapted to the climate that's found there, and they tend to have a very similar physical structure to one another. On the grasslands, you see a lot of animals that look kind of like zebras. Maybe they have different stripes or skin, but they look a lot like zebras. In the desert, you see a lot of plants that are really well adapted to dry conditions. So the ecosphere, that ecosystem for the whole Earth, can be divided into terrestrial and aquatic biomes. Terrestrial meaning on land, aquatic meaning in water. So the terrestrial biomes, examples of which are tundra, temperate boreal, the coniferous, desert, grassland, savanna, chaparral, tropical rainforest, are shown on this diagram. This is table 5.3 from page 153. The note there says you are responsible for the details of the various terrestrial biomes. No, I'm not going to ask you to draw this map, that's ridiculous, but I am expecting you to know details about those different terrestrial biomes. So you can see the distribution here on Earth. You start out at the top with polar ice caps shown in white, then you move down to tundra in blue, into taiga, northern coniferous forest, it's shown in brown. Then you go down to the temperate deciduous forest, which is shown here and also over here. So we live in temperate deciduous forest here in Toronto area. You can see the Great Lakes. The yellow, temperate grassland. The red, chaparral. The sort of peachy color is desert. We talked about those being near the 30 degrees latitude and why in previous lecture. Tropical rainforests. A lot of